It was a quiet night at the city hospital. The halls were dimly lit, the only sounds being the soft beeping of machines and the distant chatter of nurses. But something was about to happen that would shatter the calm of this otherwise peaceful night. Something that no one could have predicted. A dog, strange, uninvited and mysterious, slipped past the hospital security. Nobody noticed. Nobody suspected a thing. But what happened next would leave everyone in disbelief. It wasn't just any dog. This creature seemed almost otherworldly. Its fur a mix of dark shades, like it had been through countless storms and survived them all. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the low light of the hospital corridor, gave off a haunting intensity that sent a shiver down anyone who saw it. No one could explain how it got in, but there it was, moving silently through the halls, as if it had a purpose, a mission. The night nurse Maria was making her rounds, checking on the patients, when she noticed something odd. A soft whimper echoed down the hall. She turned her head, expecting to see a distressed patient or maybe another staff member, but instead, her eyes widened in shock. A large, dark dog was standing at the entrance of the nursery. Quiet, still, almost like it was waiting. Maria froze. Her heart raced. How had it gotten in? And why was it there? Inside the nursery there was a baby, only a few months old, peacefully sleeping in a crib, unaware of the strange visitor outside. The baby's mother had left for a moment to grab something from the vending machine, trusting the hospital staff to keep a watchful eye. But now, with the dog standing at the door, something felt wrong. Maria stepped closer, her footsteps barely audible against the cold, sterile floors. She watched in disbelief as the dog, without hesitation, approached the crib. Its movements were fluid and precise, almost deliberate. Maria's breath caught in her throat. What could this dog possibly want with a baby? Her instincts screamed at her to run, to call for help. But the dog didn't appear threatening. There was something almost gentle about the way it moved. As Maria stood there, unsure whether to intervene or stay hidden, the dog did something utterly unexpected. It gently nudged the baby's blanket, its eyes softening for a moment. Maria's jaw dropped. Was it trying to comfort the baby? Or was there something darker at play here? Just as the dog lowered its head to nuzzle the child, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Maria snapped back to reality. Someone was coming, and the dog was still there. She couldn't explain what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an ordinary animal. There was something deeply unsettling about the way it behaved, as if it had a purpose, one that no one could understand. Before Maria could make a move, the dog vanished into the shadows, as silently as it had appeared. The room was still. The baby, unaware of the strange encounter, remained fast asleep. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted in the fabric of reality. The next morning, when the nurses checked the nursery, everything seemed normal. But as they went through their usual routine, one question lingered in the air. Where had the dog gone? And what had it really been doing there? Was it a mere coincidence? Or was there something far more mysterious at play? The answers were out of reach, and the only thing certain was that the dog's presence had stirred something deep within the hospital, something no one could explain. Was the dog a messenger, or was it there for a darker purpose? And what would happen next? You won't believe what we uncovered when the investigation into the dog's mysterious appearance started. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. As the sun rose, bringing light to the hospital's sterile halls, Maria couldn't shake the images of that strange dog. The sight of it, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity, haunted her. She replayed the moment in her mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was it a stray? But that didn't explain its behavior. There was something purposeful in its movements, something that suggested it wasn't just wandering the halls aimlessly. The morning shift started like any other, but Maria couldn't focus. She told herself it was nothing, that the dog was probably just lost, or perhaps it was some kind of urban myth, a stray that had wandered into the wrong building. But deep down she knew better. There was something different about this dog. She wasn't the only one who had noticed it. Others had seen it too, though none of them could explain its presence. The nurse on duty before Maria had mentioned seeing it in the parking lot the night before. But when the security cameras were checked, there was no footage of the dog entering the building, or even being near the entrance. It was as though it had appeared out of thin air. No one could figure out how it got past security, how it made its way into the nursery undetected. The hospital staff began whispering about it. Some believed it was a sign, a message from the beyond, while others joked that it was simply a stray looking for food. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. After all, why had it gone straight to the nursery? Why had it interacted with the baby so gently, yet with such purpose? Later that day, a patient's family reported seeing the dog wandering the hospital grounds, this time near the children's ward. A nurse had tried to approach it but was stopped in her tracks by the dog's eerie stare. She claimed the dog's eyes seemed to see right through her, as if it knew something no one else did. Some of the other staff were starting to feel uneasy. They talked about it in hushed tones during breaks, speculating that the dog might have been sent as a warning. Maria decided to dig deeper. She went back to the security footage, but once again there was nothing. It was as if the dog simply didn't exist in the records. It had appeared and disappeared without a trace. Maria's unease grew. What if there was more to this than just an odd coincidence? What if this wasn't the first time something like this had happened? Determined to get answers, Maria approached the hospital's head doctor, Dr. Reynolds. She explained what had happened the night before, telling him about the dog's strange behavior and how it seemed to be drawn to the nursery. He listened carefully, his face growing more serious with each word. When she finished, he told her something that sent a chill down her spine. "You're not the first person to mention this dog," Dr. Reynolds said. "In fact, several staff members have reported seeing it over the years, always at night, always in the same areas. It's as though it's keeping watch over the children." Maria stared at him, disbelief written all over her face. "Are you saying this isn't the first time it's happened?" Dr. Reynolds sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not sure what to make of it, Maria. There are stories. Old stories. Some of the nurses who have worked here for years claim it's a guardian spirit. Others think it's something darker, something tied to the hospital's past. But nobody knows for certain. The thing is, whenever the dog appears, strange things happen. And not the good kind." Maria's heart raced. She'd heard rumors about the hospital, stories that had been whispered in the corridors for years, tales of patients who had disappeared without a trace, of strange occurrences no one could explain. But the idea that this dog was somehow connected to those events, connected to something dark and unexplainable, was too much to process. "That doesn't explain what happened with the baby last night," Maria said, her voice trembling. "Why would it go near the crib? Why did it seem so protective?" Dr. Reynolds looked at her, his expression unreadable. "That's what I don't know. But I can tell you this, there's something about this place, something ancient, something we can't see. And whenever it stirs, so does the dog." Maria was left with more questions than answers. Was the dog a protector? Or was it a harbinger of something far worse? And what was it that had been stirring in the hospital all this time? As the day wore on, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was just the beginning. The dog hadn't come to the hospital by accident. It was here for a reason. And as nightfall approached, Maria couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the dog returned. Would it come for the baby again? Or was something else on the horizon? As night descended upon the hospital, an uneasy silence settled over the building. The night shift had begun, and Maria couldn't shake the sense of dread that had been growing inside her since the dog's first appearance. It wasn't just the unsettling way it had approached the baby, nor the eerie calm with which it had disappeared. It was the weight of something unsaid, something lurking beneath the surface. The hospital, with its sterile walls and constant hum of machinery, felt like a place that was hiding more than it was letting on. Maria had spoken to a few of the other nurses about the dog, hoping someone might share more about the strange occurrences, but most were too afraid to talk openly. They'd heard the rumors, the stories about the hospital's past, but none of them wanted to get involved. The dog had been seen for decades, sometimes weeks apart, other times years. But always, it seemed to return whenever something was about to happen, whenever the hospital was on the brink of something catastrophic. As Maria walked through the quiet halls, checking rooms and making sure all was in order, she found herself near the nursery again. It was impossible to resist. She stood outside, staring through the glass, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting to see the dog there once more. The baby was asleep, wrapped tightly in a soft blanket, unaware of the growing tension in the air. But Maria couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was watching. Across the hall, she spotted Dr. Reynolds, who had been strangely absent for the past few hours. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an anxious energy. When he saw Maria, he quickly approached her, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for anyone nearby. "You need to stop looking into this, Maria," he said in a low voice, his expression dark. "You're digging up things that are better left alone." Maria was taken aback by the warning. "What do you mean? I need to understand what's going on here. That dog, it's not just a coincidence, is it?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated, then looked around once more, ensuring no one was listening. "This hospital, it has a long history. We're not the first ones to deal with these strange occurrences. But there's more to it than the dog. It's connected to the children's ward, to the babies. The stories. People believe the dog is here to protect them. But no one talks about what it protects them from." Maria's stomach turned. "What do you mean? Protect them from what?" Dr. Reynolds swallowed hard. "There's something dark in the history of this place. Before it was a hospital, it was a care facility for orphan children. Many of them never made it out. The ones that did, they spoke of something following them. Something that hunted the children who were left behind. Over the years, the stories grew, but nobody really believed them. But the dog, it's the only constant. It's been showing up at night, always near the children. Always when something terrible is about to happen." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The hospital, it seemed, had its own secrets. Secrets that had been buried for decades. The dog wasn't just a stray. It wasn't just a random creature. Had a purpose. But what was it? And why had it chosen this moment, this baby, to appear again? As Dr. Reynolds turned to leave, he paused. "Maria," he said softly, "if you value your peace of mind, leave this alone. Some things are better left forgotten." But Maria wasn't about to back down. The more she learned, the more she realized that the dog was only the tip of the iceberg. She couldn't ignore the strange incidents, the whispers among the staff, the way the hospital seemed to hold its breath every time the dog was near. The next evening, as the shadows deepened once more, Maria decided to stay after her shift and investigate. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but something inside her told her she had to find out more. She made her way through the darkened halls, each step echoing louder in the silence of the building. The nursery was locked, but that didn't stop her. Maria had seen enough to know that something was wrong, and she wasn't going to leave until she understood what it was. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound, a soft scratching, almost imperceptible, but there. She followed it down a narrow hallway that led to an old storage room. The door was ajar, and the sound was coming from inside. Maria hesitated, but the curiosity was overwhelming. She pushed the door open, her heart racing in her chest. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The room was filled with old equipment, forgotten files, and boxes stacked high. But what caught her attention was a small, unmarked chest at the back of the room. It was old, worn, as if it had been there for years, maybe longer. Maria's hand trembled as she reached for it, the scratching sound growing louder in her ears. When she opened the chest, she found something that made her blood run cold. A tattered journal, its pages yellowed with age. She began flipping through it, reading snippets of entries from someone who had worked at the hospital long ago. The words spoke of strange happenings, disappearances, sightings of a mysterious dog, and the constant presence of something dark, something that never let go of the children who stayed there. But as Maria read on, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The last entry was the most chilling. It read simply, "It's back. The dog is here again. And this time it's not just watching. It's hunting." Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the final entry in the journal. "It's back. The dog is here again. And this time it's not just watching. It's hunting." The words seemed to burn into her mind, leaving her with a sense of horror that she couldn't shake. The dog, this strange, ominous creature, wasn't just protecting the children. It was connected to something darker, something dangerous. But what did it mean by hunting? And who, or what was it after? As Maria carefully closed the journal, a cold sweat beaded on her forehead. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. She had to leave to get back to the nursery and make sure the baby was safe. But as she reached for the door, a sudden noise stopped her in her tracks, a soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound. It was the same sound she had heard earlier, the sound that had led her to the storage room. Her heart began to race as the noise grew louder, closer. Something or someone was coming. Maria's pulse hammered in her ears as she slowly turned around, but the room was empty. She could still hear the scratching, but it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the floor right beneath her feet. The ground seemed to tremble, a low vibration coursing through the building. The hospital, once so silent, now felt alive with something unseen, something unnatural. The hairs on the back of Maria's neck stood on end as she took a hesitant step toward the door. Her mind raced. What had Dr. Reynolds said? About the dog being tied to the hospital's dark past. About it hunting. She couldn't ignore it any longer. This was real. The dog wasn't just an oddity. It was part of something much bigger. Maria stumbled out of the storage room, her eyes darting down the darkened hallways. She needed to find Dr. Reynolds, to confront him, to demand answers. But as she moved toward the nurse's station, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. She wasn't alone. She turned, her breath catching as she saw the shadow, a figure moving at the end of the hall, its form barely visible in the dim light. Her stomach dropped. It was the dog. It stood there, watching her, its glowing eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. She froze, unable to move. The dog didn't advance, didn't growl or bark. It simply stood, as though waiting for something, its eyes never leaving hers. Maria felt the weight of its gaze, like it was reading her every thought, every fear. Then, as if on cue, the dog turned and began to walk down the hallway, its body gliding effortlessly over the floor, leaving no sound but the soft padding of its paws. Maria's legs finally obeyed, and she followed, her instincts screaming at her to stop, but her curiosity pushing her forward. She had to know what it wanted. She had to understand why it had come again. The dog led her deeper into the hospital, past the patient rooms, down corridors she had never seen before. The air grew colder with each step, the lights flickering overhead as if the building itself was alive, holding its breath. Maria's footsteps echoed louder in the silence, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. They arrived at a forgotten part of the hospital, one that hadn't been used in years. The walls were covered in dust, the windows darkened with grime. At the end of the corridor was a door, old and worn, its edges covered in a thick layer of cobwebs. The dog stopped in front of it, its eyes locked onto the door as if it had been waiting for this moment. Maria felt a pull in her chest, a strange compulsion to open it. She reached for the door handle, her hand trembling. As her fingers brushed the cold metal, the lights above her flickered and went out. The hospital plunged into darkness. Panic set in as she fumbled for her phone, using the weak light from the screen to guide her hand to the door. When she pushed it open, the stench of mildew and decay hit her like a wave. The room beyond was filled with shadows, but what caught her attention wasn't the sight. It was the sound. A soft, rhythmic thumping, as though something was moving in the dark. Something large. Maria's breath caught in her throat as the dog stepped into the room, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It didn't bark or growl. It simply entered, its body disappearing into the shadows. Maria, heart racing, followed, every step feeling like it could be her last. And then she saw it. At the far end of the room was a large, crumbling stone altar. Its surface was covered in ancient symbols. Symbols she didn't recognize but that seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. The thumping sound was louder now, coming from the altar itself. Maria's hand shook as she stepped closer, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. The dog was standing at the base of the altar, looking up at it. And there, in the shadows, Maria saw movement. Something was rising from the stone, something dark and shifting, something that seemed to defy reason. It was coming for her. In that moment Maria understood. The dog wasn't just a protector, it was a guide. A guide to something ancient, something tied to the very foundation of the hospital. Something that had waited for years to be awakened. But as the darkness closed in, Maria realized she might never leave this room alive. And whatever the dog had been guarding, it was coming for her now. Maria's breath hitched in her chest as the shadows around the altar seemed to stretch and pulse with an unnatural life. The dark figure rising from the stone was a grotesque shape, something twisted and ancient, its form barely comprehensible. But it wasn't just the figure that sent waves of dread through her. It was the sound that accompanied it, a deep, low growl that vibrated through her bones, echoing in the empty, decaying room. The dog had positioned itself between her and the altar, its body rigid, its eyes locked onto the shifting figure. For a moment, Maria thought the dog might attack, but it didn't move. It stood as though waiting for something, its gaze never leaving the shadowed figure. Her mind raced. What was this thing? Was it the force the dog had been guarding against all these years? The darkness that seemed to have taken hold of the hospital, infecting everything in its path? Or was it something else, something older, tied to the land, to the very foundation of the building? The questions swirled, and with each passing second, the tension grew unbearable. As the creature continued to rise from the altar, Maria felt an icy grip tighten around her heart. Her body froze, unable to move. The figure was massive now, towering over the altar like a dark god, its shape flickering in and out of existence as if it wasn't fully bound to this world. And then, as though sensing her fear, it turned its empty gaze toward her. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she stumbled back, the room spinning as the realization hit her with brutal force. The creature wasn't just there for the children. It wasn't a guardian or protector. It was the one the dog had been keeping at bay all these years. And now, it had found its way back into the world. Maria's heart hammered in her chest as she tried to steady herself. She needed to run. She needed to get out of that room, out of that cursed hospital. But as she turned to flee, something in the hallway caught her attention. Figure. Dr. Reynolds. He stood in the doorway, his face twisted in a strange mixture of fear and relief. His eyes locked onto Maria's, and for a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in them, something not entirely human. Dr. Reynolds, she gasped, barely able to speak through the terror constricting her throat. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the room, his movements slow, deliberate. "Maria," he said, his voice soft, almost reassuring. "I knew you'd come here eventually. I knew you'd find the truth." Maria shook her head, her mind reeling. "What is this? What's happening? Who is that thing?" Dr. Reynolds' lips curled into a smile, an unsettling, almost sinister expression. "You should never have come here, Maria. You weren't supposed to know. But now that you have..." His voice trailed off as he glanced toward the altar, where the figure had fully manifested, its shape now impossible to ignore. Maria's stomach churned as she took a step back, her mind struggling to piece everything together. "What are you talking about? What is that creature? Why did you bring me here?" Dr. Reynolds' smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, detached resolve. "I didn't bring you here, Maria. The hospital did. The building has its own purpose. It was never just a hospital. It was built on an ancient site, a place where rituals were performed, rituals that tied the hospital to something far more sinister than any of us could have ever imagined. And when you started digging into the history, when you uncovered the truth, You triggered something that's been dormant for years. Maria felt a surge of disbelief and anger. You knew about this. All along you knew. Dr. Reynolds nodded, his gaze never wavering. It was always meant to happen this way. You were part of the plan, Maria. The dog, the hospital, the children, it was all connected to keep this thing at bay. But now the balance is shifting. The creature is free, and nothing can stop it from reclaiming what it lost. Maria's mind spun, the weight of his words crashing over her like a wave. She had been a pawn, a part of some twisted game that had been played long before she even stepped foot in this hospital. The realization was sickening, but it only fueled her determination to stop whatever was coming. As Dr. Reynolds took another step toward her, the room seemed to grow colder, the darkness thickening like a physical force. You don't understand, Maria. This hospital was never a place of healing. It was a place of containment. And now that the creature is free. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. The dog let out a low, warning growl, its body tense as if it, too, understood the gravity of the situation. Maria's heart raced, her mind flashing through the last few hours. Everything had been a lie. Every time the dog appeared, it was never to protect, at least not in the way she'd thought. It wasn't there to shield the children from danger. It was there to prevent them from being taken. Prevent them from being used as vessels for whatever dark force was now stirring. And as Dr. Reynolds took one more step, she realized the true horror of the situation. The dog wasn't the only thing guarding the hospital. The real danger was the force that had been waiting for someone, anyone, to unleash it. And it was already too late. Before she could react, Dr. Reynolds turned his gaze toward the altar, and the creature responded. The ground trembled beneath Maria's feet, and the lights flickered once again. The hospital was no longer just a building. It was alive, feeding off the chaos, the fear, the tension that had been building for years. And now, it was on the verge of reclaiming its power. The room shook violently as the creature from the altar let out an unearthly roar that seemed to split the air. The lights flickered once more, casting the room into brief moments of strobe-like darkness, and Maria stumbled back, her legs giving way under her. The dog's growl intensified, and it darted forward, placing itself between her and the altar. The creature, now fully manifest, seemed to grow in size, its shadow stretching out like a cloud of pure malevolence. Maria's heart raced as Dr. Reynolds calmly watched the scene unfold. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold indifference. "You don't get it, do you, Maria?" he said, his voice low and almost pitying. "This was never about the hospital or even the children. It's about control. The creature you see, it's not a force of nature. It's a guardian, yes, but not in the way you think. The dog, the rituals, it's all been to keep it bound to this place, to prevent it from escaping into the world. And now it's free." Maria's chest tightened, her mind struggling to process the gravity of his words. Free. But then why had it been guarding the babies? Why had it saved them if it was never meant to protect them? The confusion was too much, her thoughts racing with 1,000 questions. Before she could speak, Dr. Reynolds continued. The dog. It was never the protector. It was the warden. It kept the creature imprisoned, tied to this place. But when the hospital was rebuilt, the seals began to weaken. Maria, you opened the door. Your curiosity. Your need to uncover the truth. He never finished his sentence. Without warning, the dog lunged forward, a blur of movement. It collided with the creature, knocking it back with a force that rattled the very foundations of the room. The creature screeched, its monstrous form writhing as if it could barely hold itself together. The air thickened with a palpable sense of energy, a raw, primal force that surged through every corner of the room. Maria scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering. She had to do something, anything, to stop this. Her eyes scanned the room, falling on the journal, still clutched in her hand. It was the only lead, the only clue she had left. Desperation drove her forward as she opened it to the final page, the one with the warning that had haunted her since the moment she first read it. The dog is the key. Only the one who releases it can seal the gate again. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the finality of it. The gate. This creature wasn't just trapped by the hospital. It was tied to the very ground, to the rituals performed long ago. And now, with the dog and the creature in a vicious struggle, Maria had one choice: to stop them both or let everything spiral into chaos. With shaking hands, Maria pulled the journal closer to the altar, placing it on the stone surface. The creature howled, its dark form coiling in fury. The dog stood firm, its body a barrier between her and the creature, eyes locked with Maria's in an almost knowing way. It was as though it understood her decision. In that moment, Maria knew what she had to do. She couldn't rely on anyone else, least of all Dr. Reynolds, who had allowed this to happen. She took a deep breath, stepping forward and reading the final words aloud. Only the one who releases it can seal the gate again. As soon as the words left her mouth, the ground beneath her feet rumbled, and a blinding light erupted from the altar. The creature screeched, its body twisting in agony as if trying to break free from an invisible chain. The dog's growls grew more intense, but it didn't move. It was standing guard, its purpose fulfilled. Maria felt the temperature drop, the air growing thick with energy. The room darkened as if the light was being siphoned from the world, leaving only shadows in its wake. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished. The creature's body had collapsed into a heap, the dark, swirling form now a lifeless mass on the stone floor. The dog stepped back, its body no longer tense, as if the battle was over. But just as Maria was about to collapse in relief, a chilling realization swept over her. Dr. Reynolds hadn't moved. He was standing still in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her with a look that was far colder than before. "It's not over, Maria," he said quietly. His tone was filled with an unsettling calmness. "You sealed the creature for now, yes. But you've also unleashed something else. You think the hospital is the only place tied to this evil. The dog, now that it's freed from its purpose, it will seek another. And you, Maria, have become the key." Maria froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked down at the journal in her hands, the final line suddenly making sense. Only the one who releases it can seal the gate again. And she realized, with a sinking heart, that she hadn't just stopped the creature. She had opened the door to something far worse. The hospital, the dog, Dr. Reynolds, they were all pieces of a much larger puzzle. And Maria was now at the center of it, whether she liked it or not. Maria's head spun as Dr. Reynolds' words echoed in her ears. Key. She had opened the gate, and now she had unknowingly set something far worse into motion. Her hands trembled as she clutched the journal, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. But even as the shadows of the room seemed to close in on her, she knew there was no going back. The hospital, with all its secrets and forgotten rituals, had always been more than just a place of healing. It had been built on land steeped in ancient power, bound to something dark that had been kept locked away for generations. And now, Maria had become an unwilling part of that story, a story that was far from finished. Dr. Reynolds stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You have no idea what you've done, do you, Maria? You've released the dog from its duty. It's no longer bound to protect this place, but it still needs someone to guide it. And that's where you come in." Maria's mind raced. What was he saying? She had thought that by reading those words aloud, she had sealed the creature, ended the terror. But now she understood. The creature wasn't the only force in play. The dog had served a greater purpose, and without it, everything was unhinged. The room felt colder, darker. The hospital, which had once been a place of life and death, now seemed like an empty shell. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with something ancient and restless. Maria looked at the dog, still standing by the altar. It hadn't moved, but its eyes, those glowing, intelligent eyes, locked onto hers once more. She could feel the weight of its gaze, as though it were trying to communicate with her, trying to tell her something. Dr. Reynolds seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. His calm demeanor faltered for a brief moment. Don't you see, Maria, he continued, his voice growing more desperate. The dog isn't just a protector. It's part of the ritual, part of the binding that keeps this force at bay. But now that it's been freed, it will seek out its new master. And you've just become that master. Maria's stomach churned. She could feel the hospital pulsating around her, the walls seeming to breathe in rhythm with the energy that had been unleashed. The dog's role had always been to keep the creature confined, but now that responsibility had shifted. And as much as she hated the thought, Maria realized Dr. Reynolds was right. She had unknowingly taken on that role. She turned to face him, determination flickering in her eyes. I won't let this continue. I'll find a way to stop it. Dr. Reynolds' smile was faint, almost sad. You can't, Maria. You never could. This place, the power within it, it's not something you can just walk away from. And now you're tied to it. The only way to stop it is to become a part of it, to embrace the power that's been dormant for so long. But you can't fight it. Not now. Maria's hands shook as she thought about what he was saying. She had thought that she could control the situation, that by reading the journal and stopping the creature, she could somehow erase the past. But this wasn't a story with a simple ending. The hospital, the dog, the creature, they were all bound together in a cycle that couldn't easily be broken. And now, Maria had unwittingly become a part of it. But she wouldn't give up. The thought of the children, the innocent lives that had been caught up in this nightmare, filled her with resolve. She couldn't let it end this way, not like this. Turning her back on Dr. Reynolds, Maria looked at the dog once more. Its gaze met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something like understanding in its eyes. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to be the one to keep the cycle going. She wasn't going to let the dark forces of this place consume her. With every ounce of strength left in her, Maria walked toward the altar. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew this was the only chance she had. The hospital's dark power was rooted in the past, but she had a chance to rewrite its future. As she approached the altar, the dog stepped aside, allowing her to pass. The air around her crackled, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. She could feel the presence of the ancient force surrounding her, pressing in from all sides. But this time she wouldn't be controlled by it. She would be the one to decide what happened next. Maria placed her hand on the altar, feeling the cool stone beneath her palm. She closed her eyes, her thoughts focused on the light, on the hope that still burned inside her. She knew that the creature's influence could be severed. There was still a way to stop it, to end the cycle once and for all. And with one final push of will, she called upon the power that lay dormant within the walls of the hospital, commanding it to break the chains that had held it in place for so long. The air around her shifted. The ground trembled. And then silence. When Maria opened her eyes, the darkness was gone. The hospital felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from its very bones. The dog was gone too, its form fading into the ether. The creature, the force that had haunted this place for so long, was no more. Maria took a deep breath, her heart still racing but filled with a new sense of peace. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. The hospital, once a place of fear and darkness, now stood in quiet stillness. And as Maria stepped into the light, she knew that whatever the future held, she had finally set things right.